Hi, everybody. Welcome back for another dispatch. So I have something to read, but I want to try to say something that's been on my mind about painting. And think about this quote that was on a friend of mine's studio wall, Israel Hirschberg. He had a quote from Avigdor Richa about painting. I remember more or less, uh, painting is about impact. Painting is impact, not knowledge. We don't go to a painting for knowledge, right? We don't go, if we're looking at a landscape, a beautiful landscape, it's, are we recording sound? Yes. If we're looking at a landscape painting, we're not going to it to get some information so that we can, figure out the topography, and we're going to, build houses or a shopping center, right? We don't go for knowledge. We go for how many trees are there. No, we go to painting because it hits us. We may experience that as beauty, but there's impact. And that impact comes about because of the life force that gets into the making, right? Think of Soutine, right? I mean, they're crazy, but they're full of his life force. Van Gogh, Monet, Joan Mitchell, Morisot. I mean, life force, impact, presence. So how does that happen? How do we how do we how do we conjure that? Because we can't make it happen, right? It's not just something we just decide to do, right? It's somehow we need to somehow invite it, conjure it, prepare, nourish it, right? Well, there are some real things that generally, not for everybody, generally speaking, we want to have skill sets, right? Being able to draw what we see, to get the colors that we see, not in order to make a realist painting, if that's not our thing, but because doing those kinds of developing those skills integrates our system, our eye and our hand, our mind, our heart. They get integrated, our materials, so that when we have an inclination, when something comes up intuitively within us, within our body, somatically, we can go, we can do, right? And so there's a kind of a direct access for our life force to go into the marking. So it's really helpful to learn all these kinds of skills, and not just observational skills of being able to, although that really becomes a foundation, it's very helpful, but all kinds of, skills working with abstract elements, right? Like shape, line, color, edge, composition, right? We want to be able to have familiarity and be able to recognize, think through, feel through. And it also becomes important to learn to play with these things, to what can paint do? How does experimenting, playing, moving into uncertainty. How does that work? How do we navigate that? So this is all to say, I have a course coming up, Abstraction as Discovery, and I know a lot of you have taken it, which is great. And if you're interested in exploring how to get your life force into your work, I suggest it. I usually hold back from doing something like a plug for a course that I'm offering, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily understood. What is this about? What if I don't really want to, I'm not an abstract painter or whatever it might be. There's something about the terms of the course that become really helpful in terms of a person's painting journey. When I did this course, it was bigger, it was 5 foot by 6 foot, and it changed everything for me. It was really, it's like, oh, wait a second, this is about life. So yeah, and if not me, take other courses from lots of people. And if you're interested, email me. I will, depending on where you're at, I'll make some suggestions. There's a lot of great painting teachers out there. So anyway. And I guess before turning over to this book, which is great, the bottom line, I think, for me, is painting brings this deep sense of meaning into my life. And I want that. I want that. I want that sense of meaning. It's not conceptual meaning, it's felt meaning. And without it, it's a lot harder for me. So there you go. All right. I hope I haven't been talking too long before going into the book. An Art of Our Own, The Spiritual and 20th Century Art by Roger Lipsey. And I chanced upon this book. It must have been sometime in the early 90s, I suppose. I was living abroad. I walked into a used bookstore in Jerusalem. What was it called? I'm going to work on that. Had a coffee shop in there. It was nice. And this called my name. You know how books can do that? Like, hey, come here. And it kept me company. I read it slowly. Yeah, okay. So here, I'm going to read a little bit. Some 75 years ago, the Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky published a small but influential book in Munich, where he had studied art and stayed on to become a leading member of its congenial arts community. His book was called On the Spiritual in Art. It was his credo, full of his concern for a new art that could reflect the deepest longings and insights of men and women. More than a personal credo, it was a call to other artists. Like so many who feel that times are changing, Kandinsky did more than 1866 to 1944. Kandinsky did more than his share to change them. The new art that he needed and that he knew to be evolving in Paris, Munich, and elsewhere would no longer be a relatively realistic art of portrait, landscape, and still life, of mythologic and religious themes, of genre images reflecting the poignancy of daily life, of nudes transforming desire into beauty. It would bear little obvious relation to the art of the past. Kandinsky thought that this new art could be based on an absolutely fresh sensitivity to line and color in themselves, to form as such rather than as description, and to space as such rather than as a setting for events. Further, to these raw materials of image making, he believed it possible to bring a new wisdom born of the artist's awareness of his or her own depths and of the resonant universe. He intuited two universes in one, the visible universe of matter, space, and time, and an invisible universe of spiritual energies. He understood that an awareness capable of encompassing such dimension cannot be bought cheaply. And he suspected that Asiatic disciplines of meditation, of which he knew little at the time, might provide a methodology through which artists could widen and reinforce it. But he intended his book primarily to wish away the old in art and culture and to sketch lightly, with conviction, what the new could and should be. His book was imperfect, but more than strong enough to launch its theme into the century. The subtitle of the present book, The Spiritual and 20th Century Art, pays homage to Kandinsky. His book was an intellectual salvo. He succeeded in stating the hopes of many artists in his time clearly and passionately enough to be widely heard. Since then, many years have passed. Many artists have worked, and many different concepts of art have had their moments in the sun. The century is now nearly complete, and there is an odd feeling of exhaustion in the visual arts. While there is no lack of gifted artists, astute critics, and well-endowed art institutions, the culture of the visual arts is nonetheless sad. As if we continue to produce art and think about it in the absence of some crucial inspiration or sense of direction that would make the venture more worthwhile. The speed and flash of the art market hardly disguise the malaise. We speak of postmodernism now. We don't even speak of that now. Now it's just contemporary. We speak of postmodernism now as if we have drained modernism, the predominant art movement of the 20th century, of its possibilities, and find ourselves moving into bleak terrain, comforted largely by moods of educated irony or cheerful laissez-faire. There was, however, a hidden side of modernism. And this means, of course, a hidden side of modern artists. It may be that we have not only failed to drain this resource, but have nearly overlooked its existence. Many of the universally respected artists whose work are altogether familiar and whom we feel we understand have in fact escaped understanding because we haven't yet penetrated the spiritual history of modern art. These were men and women who cared for the things of the spirit. Their art is in part dedicated to that concern and expressive of it. They shared Kandinsky's preoccupation with the spiritual, thought and often wrote of it in their own terms, worked for it to enter their creations not only as passing presence, but as a central reality. Religious and philosophical matters preoccupied not only verbally gifted artists who were at ease discussing such things, but also a number of important artists who either chose silence, or were shy. There is a mixed record for this hidden side of our art. It is in part a literary record of artist writings, interviews, table talk, in part the mute but impressive record of the works of art themselves. Some of us already know a little of this record. I've heard a few of Brancusi's aphorisms, read a little in Mondrian's essays, gained a general sense that the Bauhaus was not just a school of design, but also a community of seekers. Similarly, many of us have looked at Malevich canvases or the more recent works of Mark Rothko or Morris Lewis and acknowledged their transcendental theme. But our knowledge hardly constitutes a critical mass. It is vague and, like all knowledge, largely unused, tends to dissipate. The note first cleanly struck, just a little bit more here, one more paragraph. The note cleanly struck by Kandinsky was struck again and again by 20th century artists. Of course, not by everyone and almost always in highly individual ways. Some sounded it subtly and tentatively, others loudly and even bombastically. Others simply did what they had to do, knew what they were doing, and tried in occasional writings or interviews to clarify the relation of artistic form to spiritual meaning as they experienced it. There is no orthodox spirituality in this century, and the culture at large has been amazingly unreceptive to the spiritual aspect of the artist's thought and work. Nonetheless, 20th century art set out to be an art of spiritual content and succeeded to some real degree. The century has been dominated by science and material progress, distorted by world wars and totalitarian regimes, and unsure of its metaphysics. So much so that most professional philosophers, let alone most literate people, have discarded the very word metaphysics. Yet many of the artists understood their art to be an avenue of search, not just for form or originality, but for deep meaning and penetrating vision. It goes on. That just... All right. Hope you're all well. Making stuff, painting, drawing. I'm just working over here. I'm not sure. All right. Onward. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.